Welcome, everyone. It's World's Children's Day. We're delighted to have you here. Thank you for showing up and for standing up for the children. Standing up for the rights of their parents to protect them. To protect and guide them. Children are the property of their parents. They are not the property of the state. So if a child accidentally breaks a window, who pays to have that replaced? The parents do. You know why? Because they're responsible for the child. The state doesn't pay for it. We must get this very, very clear in our minds, okay? The children belong to. Who do they belong to? They belong to the parents until they become adults, and then they belong to themselves, fully responsible for themselves, just as we all are, fully responsible. The children belong to and are the property and responsibility of the parents. We stand here today against SOGI 123 program in schools. I guess I should have introduced myself. My name's Jacqueline Rose. I'll be your MC today. I'm a local singer-songwriter here from Vernon. SOGI stands for sexual orientation, gender identity. This has been implemented throughout Canada without transparency, without input or knowledge by the parents. In fact, SOGI allows the schools to encourage our children to lie and to deceive their parents about what they're doing at school, by what names they're called, how they're dressing at school, what prescription drugs they're using at school, and much, much more. The state is aiding and abetting our children to lie to their parents, and this is morally wrong. We are standing against what is morally and ethically wrong. This we must do. SOGI 123 program sexualizes and confuses children as they approach and transition into the most confusing times of our lives, puberty. SOGI sexualizes and indoctrinates elementary school children to become sexually active. Changing boys into girls and girls into boys while their bodies are not mature is what we are standing against. I love this crowd. You guys are awesome, absolutely awesome. We're not here to discuss sexuality or private sexual practices among consenting adults. This has nothing to do with homosexuality. Absolutely nothing. And you all know that. It has nothing to do with adult sexual practices, choices, or preferences. We're here for one very important purpose, and that is the health, happiness, and well-being of our children and our community and beyond. It's our job as adults to protect the innocence and the potential of children. They know not what they do, nor the repercussions, but we do, and therefore we must act. We want to draw your attention to the bathrooms back here, just a couple of announcements to get started. We've got some refreshments, coffee, danishes, that sort of thing, by donation if you're hungry. There's also a SOGI table down there that has some of the books. If you can stomach it, you can peruse through and see what's available in our children's libraries at schools right now. Let's see, what else do we have? We want to thank Renee. Renee set up a beautiful sound system this morning, you guys. Poor guy got kicked off by the bylaw officers, had to repack everything and come back in a whirlwind because he already had it done. So thank you, Renee. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Renee. All right. Okay, we're going to be getting into our speakers in a minute here. Almost. The greatest power we have, and I'm sure most of you know this, is the power of love in our hearts. Love is more powerful than anything else. It's more powerful than fear or anger or shame or guilt or any of those things. So if we can, as we can raise our own vibration personally and embrace love more, as we become more aware of who we are in the world and what we're doing, we'll change everything. But the greatest power we have is love, and it starts with love for yourself. 90% of communication happens not through words. It happens through your stature, through your vibration, through your tone of voice, the way you dress, the way you look, where you are, what you do. It's not by what you say. So it's who we are. Like this gentleman here at the front has love right on the front of his shirt. Who we are speaks much louder than the words that we use. And love is the greatest power of all. Our first speaker is a man well acquainted with the opening of the heart and the power of the heart, the strength of the heart. He's been an advocate for helping humanity and people for decades, going out of his way to develop systems and ways to help. And he's been involved with teaching people to take their children out of schools and working with people across Canada we need to develop an alternative schooling system. So when our children get out of school, they know how to be a responsible adult. Please join me in welcoming Joshua Lemons, an Indigenous leader.
Thank you, Jackie. I want to thank the people that put this together, and the marshals, and the loved ones that made this an amazing event. Thank you very much. Tanse, Benesi, Indigenakash, Dinawe Magina Kinyo de Temewan. My name is Joshua. I'm of the Eagle Clan. And I claim this under any of the authorities' Indigenous lands for you right now. I want to share something about, before I really continue, the difference between law and legal. We stand under natural law, which supersedes federal, provincial, municipal laws. When we gather as a people, we have that right. If they contradict that law, they are guilty of criminal malfeasance. And it can be a term of 14 years, and it's even written in the law. So stand up and be the citizen that you are for your territories. What are some of the wonderful things that we have under this law? We have the freedom of what? We have the freedom of movement. We have the freedom of speech, which we're using right now. We have the freedom of privacy. We have the freedom, as some of the doctors are here, do no harm. And they've paid a dear price to be here and to live their lives under the harmony of goodness and kindness and truth. I just extend to you the heart of creation, the heart of Mother Earth and Father Sky, that touches the fruits of love, that touches the fruits of goodness, of kindness, of self-control, of mercy, of generousness. I give you that. You think that when you live in these actions that, oh, how can we do this? Because they've got fear. But when you don't live in fear and you move ahead, your actions are pure, because that one little light can light up an entire cave, an entire vat of darkness. I want to share a couple of things about the Indigenous, what they went through residential school and what's coming now. This has been planned for many years, by the way. Since 2017 that I'm aware of, they've been intruding into the school system to indoctrinate what's happening now. Let me share a little bit about some of the stories that happened through residential schooling. What did they do? They took children from their homes and they brought them into a school where they were abused in many, many ways. They stopped them from speaking their language from their culture, from their their people. And what's happening today? We have schools where they're stopping the children from speaking their language. Think for a minute. Children need innocence. Children need the connection so when they grow up, they are able to make decisions that are handed down through their parents. For the Indigenous, it was cut off very quickly. What you need to do, and I know some people disagree with me, but the intrusion of the kind of sexuality and things happening integrated throughout Canada, take your kids out. I have very close friends that are totally awake of this kind of thing, and their teenage son came home and said, "Dad, I'm really confused. I think I might be transgender." Take your kids out, find homeschooling, find an opportunity for you to be able to spend time with your children. If your income has to be cut, so be it. I have a good friend who's Indigenous. Her daughter, a beautiful young Indigenous woman, said, "Well, I'm going to go stay with my friends for a few days." She had no idea, but they flew her out to Calgary where they cut her, you know what, off. These things are happening all the time. Being aware is very important, and all I can say is that's the only thing I can think of is take your kids out, homeschool, get involved with different communities where you can tap into. Let's not destroy the age of innocence for our children. As an Indigenous man, it's important for me to be able to usher in up to the next 7 generations in preparation for our children, and we've lost that. And I'm giving you that job. It's part of who you are as human beings. My last few words are this. It's light and love that carries us forward. There's not one day when I'm either attacked or ridiculed by my own people and others. I don't fear it at all, because the Creator holds the key to my death. And as I move forward, and as you will move forward, there is no fear, because it's the light and love within you that is here and resident today. I think it's very important for us. This is our new family, folks. I have lost so much of my family, some to death. And this is my new family. That's when I see you and I greet you, I will see you again as my brothers and sisters. And some of my good friends have come here I haven't seen in years. So bless you. Connect with the people. This is your family. Miigwech.
All right, family members, thank you very much, Joshua. Our next speaker is going to talk to us about the legal implications of what the SOGI 123 program entails. He's going to talk about potential solutions, what we can do. He's the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms out of Calgary. And we're really glad. Our speakers have come from a long ways, from Alberta, from the interior, from the coast. They've come here to join us and talk about these very important things, because we know these are active people here. We are making change, my friends. We're making change across this country, and it's ricocheting everywhere. We're sending out that vibration. You're doing it. It's you. And so awesome. Please join me in welcoming John Carpe, president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms.
Thank you for that warm Vernon welcome. I am thrilled to be here, thrilled to be back here. I did not, You're a tall man. Thank you, yes, that's much better. I did not grow up in Vernon, but my mom has lived here since 1986, and so I spent many, many Christmases and Thanksgivings and birthdays and summer holidays and so on. So whenever I'm back in Vernon, I feel like I'm back home, and I'm deeply honored to be invited to be with you this afternoon, deeply honored to be in the company of Dr. Charles Hoff, who's going to speak next. Speaking truth to power and suffering for it. There's a prime example. When the society is in decay and when the culture is rotten, then when you stand up for truth, you will face persecution and suffering and hardship. And kudos to those who are the tip of the spear, who have borne the brunt of the hatred and the persecution and the oppression. And so, and kudos to all of you. I know many of you have lost your jobs, have been expelled from university, are not permitted to work. And that's all because of an anti-science, wicked ideology that seeks to punish people over a perfectly legitimate medical decision they made 2 years ago to not get jabbed. And even today, you've got this fanatical ideology that we're up against. This morning, I had the privilege of meeting with some Justice Center supporters. They had opened up their home, and I had a delicious breakfast. And one of the people there said, this is quite profound, lies have speed, but truth has endurance. We are going to defeat this tyrannical ideology that has descended on this country. Because truth always vanquishes the lie. Truth always vanquishes the lie. Unfortunately, it takes a lot longer than what we want, but it does happen. Lies have speed, truth has endurance. So, the Justice Center is now involved in a case in Saskatchewan. About 2 weeks ago, the LGBTQ group called You Are Pride has filed a court application against the Saskatchewan government in respect of a new policy that requires parental consent when children under the age of 16 want to start using opposite sex pronouns or names or washrooms or what have you. And so they filed this court application, and I've read the documents, and it's quite interesting because they keep on referring to the charter rights of children as though children have a charter right to keep their own parents in the dark. It's absolutely absurd. Children do not have the same rights as adults. Children cannot drive. Children cannot consume alcohol or marijuana. Children cannot have sex with an adult. Children cannot join the military. Children cannot get married, and on and on and on. They cannot travel abroad unless they have the consent of their parents. So to pretend that children are these mini adults that have the same rights and freedoms that you would have when you were 18 is ridiculous. It's worse than ridiculous. It is dangerous and it is evil. What children do have is a right, and I'm not sure if it's a legal right or not, but it's certainly a moral right to the love and the affection and the care and the nurturing and the protection of their own parents. That is the right of the child. Children cannot receive that affection and attention and love and nurturing and protection when parents are kept in the dark. It doesn't happen that way. And in the same way, parents have a responsibility and therefore also a right to protect and love and nurture their children. And parents cannot carry out that responsibility when they are kept in the dark. So there's court action in Saskatchewan, and it's the same ideology that you've got with Soji and with so many bad things across the country. There are two big lies. The first one is that all parents are dangerous and abusive and should therefore be kept in the dark about what their children under the age of 16, what's happening to them in school. It's a big lie. The truth is, there is a very small number of parents who are really, really bad, really abusive, and there is a small number of children, sadly, do in fact need to be protected from their own parents. That's a sad reality. You don't address that problem by taking away all the rights of all the parents to know what's going on with their own children at school, whether it's SOGI or whether it's the policy in Saskatchewan or what have you. In the same way, we have a very small number of dangerous drivers on the road who are a threat to everybody because they're impaired by drugs or alcohol, or they're impaired by senility, or they're not paying attention. So we've got some really bad drivers. You don't solve that problem by taking away everybody's driver's license. And so in the same way, you don't deal with a very small number of abusive parents by taking away the rights of all parents to be properly informed about what's going on with their own children. So that's the first big lie. The big lie that all parents are dangerous and abusive. It's a lie, and we're going to defeat it simply by speaking the truth and not being intimidated when you get, because you're going to face the accusations. They're going to tell you that you're hateful, you're homophobic, you're transphobic, you're racist, you're sexist, etc., etc. And I think it's a great thing. More and more of us, we're developing a thicker and thicker skin and say, bring it on, because if you need to cut into name calling, you don't have an intelligent argument. The second big lie, so the first big lie is that all parents are dangerous and abusive. The second big lie is that political activists have a greater love for other people's children than the love that parents have for their own children. It's a big lie. How many parents here would you run into a burning building to save your child and risk your own life? How many political activists are going to be willing to risk their own life to go into a burning building to save somebody else's child? Some, but the numbers are not going to be quite the same, right? With parents, you're going to have close to 100% of parents are going to be willing to risk their own lives to go into a burning building to get their own child out. When it's a political activist talking about other people's children, that number is going to be a lot lower than 100%. And that's just a fact of life. And this whole court action in Saskatchewan and the SOGI policies and so many other bad policies across the country are predicated on that second big lie, that somehow political activists and teachers and social workers have a greater love for kids than the love that parents have for their own children. That lie also, we're going to defeat it by standing firm in the truth. And we're going to keep on repeating the truth, and we're not going to be intimidated by any of the name calling. I am hugely encouraged by signs of hope that I see. In New Brunswick, the government is standing firm on a policy that for children under 16, if they want to do a name change at school or start using the pronouns of the opposite sex, or bathrooms, change rooms, dressing, etc., and the New Brunswick government is standing firm. And if their policy is challenged in court, the Justice Centre will be there as well to help them to defend that policy, just like we are in Saskatchewan. So in Saskatchewan, we're providing the legal representation, and that's thanks to the generosity of Justice Centre supporters. I know there's many of you here today. If you want to know more about the Justice Centre, I'm speaking in Armstrong at the Hullcar Hall tonight at 7:30. So if you're interested in that, feel welcome to come. It's a public meeting, no fee, no charge. In Saskatchewan, we are providing legal representation for the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, which is a group, and we got at least one fan here. Gender Dysphoria Alliance are adults who know the issue from personal experience, who are concerned about children, who want children to get accurate information, who do not want children to be abused and manipulated. And so the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, just yesterday or the day before, was granted intervener status in the Saskatchewan case in support of the Saskatchewan government policy. There is a second group called Parents for Choice in Education. It's based in Alberta, and they also received intervener status in this court case. So the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing, and here we are all today, and we're not doing nothing. And this is what's going to make the difference. Bad news is things might get worse before they get better, but that's okay, because we're going to cultivate the virtues of courage and perseverance. We need courage to speak truth to power, courage to not be intimidated by the name-calling. We need perseverance. We're not going to turn this country around in the next few days or the next few weeks or the next few months. This is a project, this is a plan, this is a mission. It's going to take years, it's going to take decades. But we're going to get to a point where Canadians understand with their minds and cherish in their hearts our fundamental freedoms. The freedoms of religion and conscience, expression, association, peaceful assembly, the right to travel and movement, and the right to bodily autonomy, where we as individuals get to decide what medical treatments we want or do not want without duress and coercion and pressure. We're going to win back these rights and freedoms that we've lost, and we're going to have perseverance because we know that quitters never win and winners never quit. And so we have the perseverance to keep on going. And we're going to win this fight because truth will always vanquish the lie, because freedom will always triumph over tyranny, because justice will always triumph over injustice. And we are Canadians, and we know that it's better to die standing than to live on our knees. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John. That was wonderful. And just as a repeat there, Hulkar Hall, it's towards Armstrong area, 7:30 tonight. Everybody's welcome to hear more from John and strategies and techniques we can use. You know, there comes a time in our lives when we all have to come together as one. And we're here because we know this is that time. It's been that time for the last 3 years. And it is certainly that time right now when it comes to protecting the children. We need to overcome our petty differences, our differences of color, economic status, how much wallet you have in your money, how much money you have in your wallet, what color your skin is, or your religion, or where you grew up, or where you got educated. Whether you're white collar or blue collar, there's so many ways that we have been divided. And to do what John said, what Joshua said, what Dr. Hoff is going to say, to do these things, we need to come together. We've got to increase, and that's where love comes in, because it's so strong. It cannot be moved from what's right. I mean, what's moral, what's ethical. We will raise our vibration, and nothing will be able to stop us. So coming together as one, overlooking little personality issues we may have with each other, because the level of division has come to why we're here today with the SOGI 123 program. The level of division is now an individual and a child of all things within themselves being divided right there. This is why we're here. Our next speaker is an emergency surgeon for decades, very familiar with the effects of medications and surgeries on the body. He is the perfect person to come and talk to us about the effects these gender transitions have with the drugs, etc., on the body, on the person, on the soul, well, he's going to tell you all about it. We're delighted to have him join us. He has tremendous courage. He's been speaking up and standing up for freedom since this whole business began. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Charles Hoff.
Well, thank you for a wonderfully warm Vernon welcome. It is wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for coming out. We are here for our children. I am a father of four children who we homeschooled from day one. We did not trust what the government was doing in the educational system, and so my children never spent one single day in school. But we are here to protect our children because they are under attack. As we have all seen, there is literally attack upon humanity because the enemy of our souls hates mankind and is trying to destroy us. But the children are the future. The children are the future of this nation and of the world. And if you can take down the children, you can take down the world. So, I stand before you as a family doctor and an emergency room doctor. I've spent the last 30 years in the little, mostly First Nations community of Lytton in the Fraser Canyon, where it's been my privilege to serve the Nlakatma people for 3 decades, most of my career. And one of the tragedies of that community was its Indian residential school. Lytton had an Indian residential school for, I think it was about 80 years. Generations of students were taken away from their families and literally by government mandate were put into this institution to literally try to change their identity, to change the language that they would speak, to change their religious beliefs, to change the way they think, to literally try and take the Indian out of the Indian. And it was evil beyond imagination. And when I arrived at Lytton in 1993, I was devastated to see firsthand what that legacy was doing to the people there. That's a tiny community of literally, I don't know, about catchment area was maybe 1,500 people. I don't know how many it was, but there were so many suicides happening. And I, as an emergency room physician, spent many traumatic days and nights trying to save people who had shot themselves or who had lain on the railroad tracks and had no limbs left, or who had thrown themselves into the river or in front of a semi-trailer because they could not live with the trauma, the sexual abuse that had happened to them in that school. And the government of Canada is indicted in this. They took these children away from the protection of their families and put them in a place where their families had no idea what was happening to them. And those institutions became an absolute magnet for pedophiles because they knew these children were unprotected. And the government of Canada is doing exactly the same thing now in trying to keep parents in the dark. This SOGI curriculum that literally plans to sexualize our children, to destroy their innocence, to sexualize them, and to confuse their gender identity is evil beyond imagination. This idea that you can choose your gender is a lie from the pit of hell. So I was asked to give you a medical perspective, and doctors are always expected to do what they do evidence-based. So I'm going to give you the evidence for the harm that is happening to our children through the sexual abuse in the educational system. Yesterday I was filling out a pap smear form for one of my patients that I'd done a pap smear on. And on the pap smear, you have to put on whether this person who you just did a pap smear on is male, female, or other. If you've got a cervix, you're a female, but obviously they don't know that. That is how absurd it is. The other thing is that absurd is, every time I I get lab results back on a patient, and I'm looking at their blood count or their cholesterol level or their blood work, I have to interpret that according to their gender. Because a male and a female do not have the same normal cholesterol levels. They don't have the same iron levels. They don't have the same liver enzymes. They don't have the same indices of renal function. They don't have the same amount of hemoglobin or the number of red blood cells, and on and on and on. The difference in our genders is literally down to a molecular level. I sometimes see these forms where it says, it asks you what their gender at birth was. So I want to tell you something, that gender is not assigned at birth. Your gender is assigned at the moment of your conception. And you cannot change it. Just like I can't change what the normal parameters for a blood count is on my patients, that was assigned by Almighty God. And so none of us chose the gender that we are born. It was chosen by God. And wherever we try to defy God's order, we do it at our own peril. There are a couple of scientific studies that really bear mentioning. So there was one that was published last year, in June of last year, in the Journal of the Canadian Medical Association, where they looked at mental health of transgender teenagers. And they looked at 6,800 transgender teenagers across all of Canada. And they looked at states of mental health and found that teenagers, and this was literally just looking, this is not looking at adults, we're talking about children here. When you're an adult, you can choose whatever you want to do. We're talking about people in their most vulnerable time of their lives, which is their childhood. And this study, published in the Journal of the Canadian Medical Association, showed that teenagers who identified as transgender had a 750% increase in suicide attempts. Literally, that's 7.5 times higher incidence of attempting suicide. So this is what this does to their mental health. This is not something good for them. This is not something that is making them happy. This is something that makes them want to die. This is absolutely tragic. Now, some people will say, well, that's because they don't feel accepted. That's because there's sort of bias against them and they kind of feel like an outcast. So let's look at the Scandinavian countries like Norway and Sweden and Denmark. They have, for 30 years, they have worked very hard to make transgenderism completely socially acceptable. So we can look at their evidence. So, fascinating research done, published in 2017 in Sweden, that looked back at 3 decades of transgenderism and what the medical establishment euphemistically calls gender-affirming treatments. Okay, and that can be hormone manipulation to try and make you grow breasts or to grow facial hair, or surgeries or whatever to try and get you to look or feel like the other gender. They looked at 3 decades of this, and they found, so of course there's lots of medical studies that the so-called experts will quote to show how they will claim that allowing a person to change their gender reduces suicide risk, but they only look at the first 1 or 2 years. This study looked back 10 years or more, and they found that people in Sweden who had had gender reassignment through some way or another had a 20 times higher risk of completed suicide. This is not suicidal ideation. The suicide rate in transgender people, where it was more than 10 years after their gender-affirming therapy, was 20 times their peers. So this is devastating to mental health. Absolutely devastating. This idea that this by gender affirmation you're somehow helping these people is tragic. These people literally would rather be dead. And I've read of tragic accounts of people who went for this surgery and now live with the complications of that. With chronic pain, they've got these peculiar sexual organs that don't look like a sexual organ, that cannot give them any pleasure, that do not function, they have no anatomical function whatever, and these people literally want to be dead. These people are victims. We need to come alongside them with love and compassion. They are victims. These people are victims of a lie that if you can just affirm them enough, then they will be happy. And it is absolutely a lie from the pit. And in that Swedish study that showed the 20-fold increase in suicides in people that were more than 10 years after their gender-affirming therapy, when we look at other factors of health, they found that the cancer risk and the risk of cardiovascular disease, heart attack, and stroke was 250% higher in those people more than 10 years after their gender reassignment. So the health implications for this are devastating. This is not helping anyone. It is tragic. So, as John Carpe mentioned, all that, quoting John Burke, who is one of my heroes from the 17th century, all that is needed for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. So thank you for coming out. Thank you for standing together.
Thank you, Charles. A tireless advocate for the children and for all of us in perfect health. You know, he pointed out something really important, that what is true never changes. What is false changes constantly. And that's why traditional values, respecting your elders, and this sort of thing is very, very important for us to pay attention. Traditional values, what the ancient wisdom doesn't change. We still value what Shakespeare teaches us in his plays. We still value what Socrates said on the steps of back in Greece. What Lao Tzu said, what Confucius shared. These are eternal truths. They do not change. And these are all written in your hearts, my friends. You all know the difference between what's right and what's wrong, breath by breath, moment by moment. So respecting our elders is very, very important. They've been through the cycles of life more than we have. So let's respect that. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, but let's respect what's right and what's true and what's ancient. Our next speaker, as I'm sure you'll all appreciate, especially after hearing what Charles Hoff just had to say to us, is going to be demonstrating her incredible courage to come up here and share with you her journey through transitioning. She's going to share with you what happened before, during, and after, and what the regrets are now and how she feels about it. So I hope you can understand or imagine just how much courage it takes to come up here and share such an intimate journey with us here today. So please join me in welcoming Kelly.
Yeah, it looks good. My name is Kelly Peary. My legal name is Kenneth Anderson. You know both my names, and I'm okay. Something that's not in my story that I want to mention briefly. Come closer to the mic. I was on the Trans Health Program Advisory Committee in 2008 when the research that Dr. Hoth was talking about came out. And what we discussed on that committee was how to suppress further research that would pathologize and marginalize transgender people. That was the response of advocates to that research that said that post-surgery, we started committing suicide. At about 7 years post-surgery, that was the point at which the suicide rates just went up, and they remained up for the entire duration of the survey. I just wanted to add that. And I need to be brief, so I'm going to have to read this to keep. I'm a 57-year-old woman. I am a transition regretter. I was born in December 1966, the youngest of my mother's 6 children. In 1969, my mother married a pedophile. Growing up, social events were chaotic. They felt like there were too many sharp edges, bright colors, and loud voices. I moved to Vancouver, BC in the early 2000s. There I encountered transgender ideology and was completely entranced by the fantasy that living my life as a man would make all the awkward feelings go away. In 2004, I began attending Vancouver Coastal Health's transgender health program, their peer support counseling services, their peer support group, and FTM, etc. Peers further along in the transition process explained to those just starting out how to navigate barriers to access what was then called trans health care. My peer support group told me of someone who had prescribed hormones based on her doctor's referral. I obtained the necessary referral and was prescribed testosterone on my second visit. I was told to expect male normal health outcomes. No one talked about how cross-sex hormones are like burning diesel in a gasoline engine. I now live with diabetes, and I've become aware that women who take testosterone have a higher rate of type 2 diabetes. The peer support group were hyper-focused on the process. Get a carry letter, real-life experience, choose your new name, qualify for surgeries. It was always, after you achieve this next step, you're going to be happy. 2006, I'm 39 years old. I'm 2 years into this process, and my family has no idea what I'm doing. The surgeon who prescribed me testosterone also performed my hysterectomy. I was 3 days in the hospital and then sent home. The first visceral hit from this was realizing that I am now infertile. Peer support was a cult of affirmation-driven indoctrination. My family's grief, remorse, shock, and confusion were all framed as manifestations of their lack of acceptance, transphobia, and intolerance of my autonomy. Routine post-hysterectomy examinations were waived so as not to cause me undue emotional distress. The abdominal pain and discomfort I had begun to experience was missed. I now believe that if post-operative examination is going to cause undue emotional distress, the person is not ready to have that operation. My peer support group assured me my abdominal discomfort was normal or simply stress caused by transphobia. There was never any encouragement to seek medical advice. During 2007, I underwent a psychiatric process to obtain approval for a bilateral mastectomy. In 2008, I reported to UBC Hospital at 7 a.m. for a bilateral mastectomy, expecting to be released at about 3 p.m. I had a reaction to the anesthetic. My post-operative recovery period should have been about a half an hour, and it lasted several hours. I was discharged later that evening. Early the following morning, I woke up in severe pain and agony. It felt like the left side of my breast was ripping off. I was taken to Vancouver General Hospital, and I had internal bleeding and was scheduled for emergency surgery. I waited a day and a half for that. Because of my earlier reaction to the anesthetic, they used a lighter sedative. I woke up on the operating table while they were closing up the incision. I was extremely scared, and I was going to get up and leave, and I was screaming obscenities at the hospital staff, so they knocked me out. When I came to the second time, they had me restrained. I was kept in the hospital for 2 nights. As a truck driver, wearing a seatbelt is still painful and uncomfortable because of scar line adhesions and keloid scarring. In 2009, I'm still experiencing pain and discomfort in my abdominal area, and I eventually seek medical intervention. I go to the emergency room. In 2009, within an hour of arriving at Vancouver General Hospital, I was operated on for an abdominal abscess. The abdominal pain and discomfort I had been experiencing after my hysterectomy were symptoms of an abscess formation. They weren't manifestations of transphobia. Over the next year, I was on several courses of antibiotics. I was unable to work for a year. And today, I no longer have complete control of my bodily functions. Late in 2010, my world came crashing down. I realized that despite everything I've done to surgically and chemically alter my appearance, I will never be a man. What I do today is my nieces, my nephews, my younger cousins all call me Kelly. They call me she. They refer to me as their aunt. I'm a transition regretter. Childhood is a time of fantasy and daydreams, of once upon a time and happily ever after. If an adult like me can become completely entranced by the ideology that says I can live my real life as a man, what chance do children have? And I guess queer theory and gender ideology are concepts that are difficult for me to understand. What chance does a little boy or a little girl in first grade have to stand up against a teacher who's saying, "Oh, Johnny, you have long hair, so we know that you're a little girl, and it's okay for you to have your girl name here at school because this is a safe place." And that's what children are facing, just because they're different. Thank you.
Kelly, you got a standing ovation. The first standing ovation today is for you. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing that tender story. We all know that our children are precious. And Kelly's story just reminds us of just how precious our children are. Their minds are being molded as they're growing up. They're being molded by who we are and how we behave and what we hold value in. Remember, the more we love ourselves, the more easily we're going to be able to create boundaries because we're honoring and loving ourselves, and that's going to teach the children to do that too. I'm going to sing you a song that I wrote many years ago. It's called Precious People. I wrote it for the children.